This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Now that the Supreme Court has opened the political money floodgates, progressive activist Madison Paige says we can fight it by organizing at the extremely local level. Things could get nasty between the United States and Russia, according to former Ambassador Michael Ussery. And Bill Press talks with Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressman Mark Pocan about the Supreme Court and unemployment insurance. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Madison Paige is an advocate of what she calls micropolitics, winning progressive battles at the state, local, and neighborhood levels. And that, she says, may be how to fight big money. And we welcome to americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Madison Paige, who is a micropolitics activist. She's an advocate, speaker, and co-founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance, which is a political services and training firm dedicated to giving state and local Democratic candidates and progressive causes the tools they need to run strong, credible, competitive campaigns in every district in America. Madison Paige, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. You're an advocate of building progressive movements at the very local level, which is basically what that little description was. So is state government the way to go on major national issues like, say, marriage equality, gun control, reproductive rights?
Well, I'm going to say for the record that, as a leftist, I think no. I mean, I'd like to see a lot of this legislation happening at the federal level. I mean, I think it's absolutely insane that we're talking about marriage equality at a state-by-state level. It cannot be. It makes no sense to be married in one state and not married in another. That needs to be handled at a federal level. The same thing, for example, with gun control. Part of the problem we have with gun control, right, is that some states are more lax than other states, and there's no regulatory mechanism that prevents people from moving from one state to another state. So we have this patchwork system with gun control as well. So I think ideally, yes, I would like to see a lot of these issues handled at the federal level. However, we also have a situation where, for example, reproductive rights has been handled on the federal level, right? It's been handled at the federal level. Not only, it's been handled at the federal level for decades. But what we're seeing at the state level is an eradication of that settled law, state by state by state. And they happen to all be states that are Republican-controlled because they don't really care if it's been handled at the federal level. They don't really care what the law says. They don't even care what the Supreme Court says. We're seeing the same thing that happened, that's going on with the ACA, the Obamacare health care law.
Absolutely.
They don't care. It's been handled. It's settled law. It's been in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has made a constitutional judgment about it. It's done. They don't care. They're taking it at the state by state level. And right now, it doesn't really matter whether or not it's handled at the federal level or not. Republicans are doing a really good job of way at even things that have been handled at the federal level. So while I advocate strongly for certain things to be handled at the federal level, until we can get those Republicans out of the State House, we're going to have problems with even stuff that passes at the federal level because they're just not having it. And in addition to that, we are also having problems at the state level with Republicans who are nullifying municipal rules. A lot of states are passing laws in their capital that make it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for local city and county governments to create laws that are relevant to them. So we're seeing that happen in a lot of Republican-controlled legislatures, and it of course comes out of ALEC, and this is the thing that they're doing because they understand that a lot of local governments are saying, guys up there in the Capitol are crazy. We're going to create these different laws in our own municipality. And so to preempt that, the Koch brothers and ALEC and all of these other interests have made it possible for state legislatures to pass laws that say, well, you can't do that unless you can't do anything at the municipal level unless you have it approved by us. So we have to get the Republicans out of our state houses. We have to do that because they don't care what happens at the federal level. If they don't agree with it, they're going to create rules to work around it or chip it away. And they don't even care, in a lot of ways, what's happening at the local level. They want to chip away at that too.
Yeah.
We've got to focus on states, and we've got to focus on local governments. They're sort of our vanguards.
There are some very pernicious things going on in states like North Carolina, where legislatures are taking away voting rights, giving tax breaks to the rich, giving prisons away to private contractors. How do you stop all this stuff from happening?
Well, we got to get the Republicans out. That's the simple answer. It may not be easy, but it's certainly the simple answer to that problem.
I have a feeling this is going to be the answer to my next 4 or 5 questions, too.
Well, but you know something, though, Jim? Here's the thing. There's also something that we have to consider when we say get the GOP out. And when you think about the fact that in 50% of legislative races in 2011, there was no general election opponent. And when you think about the fact that in 2011, 80% of incumbents didn't even face a primary challenge, it's more than just let's get the GOP out. They got to have somebody to run against, right?
Right.
If they don't have anybody to run against, or if the person that they're running against them can't mount a credible, strong campaign, then there's no way for the citizens to express their preferences and their voice. And we lose something when we don't have choices on the ballot.
We're speaking with Madison Paige, co-founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance. You know, historically, Madison, state legislators have been playgrounds for corruption, composed of small business people with very narrow interests. How can you trust them to serve the people better than, say, governors, presidents, and Congress?
No, I don't. I don't. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't trust them any more than I trust anyone else. But as a citizen and a voter, I don't feel like I have to. When you come into my district and you say, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to do for you, this is what I will do if you elect me, and if I vote for you and you go there, I expect you to do it. Or if you can't get it done, I expect you to try really hard to try and get it done.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't have to really trust you, per se. I just have to have a way to hold you accountable. So where the breakdown, to me, if you ask me, it seems where the breakdown is that if you don't do what I sent you to the State House to do or the County Commission to do, I have to have a choice to be able to replace you. And if I don't, well, then it really doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter. So we have to facilitate the ability for people to be able, because that's the only way we can hold people accountable. I don't have to trust the person. I mean, I guess in some ways I do, right? But I have to. If I take them at their word and I send them to do a job, if they're not doing the job, I've got to be able to replace them.
Well, they need to feel that up front, though, right? I mean, because obviously,
yes.
if you're sending them there, you are trusting them at that point. But they do have to understand. I'm trusting you now. Don't mess this up.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't mess it up, or I'm going to replace you.
Yeah. What do you think of states like California that govern so much by voter initiative? I mean, does that seem like? I mean, it does really seem like pure democracy in action, but the results aren't always very progressive, are they?
No, the results are not always progressive, and democracy is messy. You know, I would say that a direct initiative, I don't really have an issue with it, but there's a couple of issues that sort of stick in my craw when it comes to ballot initiatives, citizen initiatives, where it's, you know, first is that what you usually have is this really outsized imbalance between the pro side and the con side. And there's usually one side with, like, all the tools and everything they need to be able to influence public opinion on a particular issue. And it's usually the side that's backed by lobbyists and big money interests.
Yeah.
And then you have the other side that usually is not quite as well situated, that can't really get their point of view across effectively, as effectively as the other side. So I think what happens is a lot of times you have people voting in these ballot initiatives. I think it's incredibly important that people have all the information they need, that they have accurate information, or that at least they've been presented with both sides of the issue. I mean, it's why we're passionate about educating people and making sure that they know what the issues are at the state and local level, because you're not going to get it in a 30-second commercial spot.
Well, you know,
I think it's, first of all, very important that people have enough information.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, too, is that a lot of times you'll hear voters overwhelmingly in favor of one particular initiative or another, and it gets beaten up, torn up, shredded up, and then all of a sudden it just seems to go away, even after the populace has said, yes, this is what we want.
Yeah. So. Well, part of it, too, is the language on the ballot. And I know that in some states they've actually passed legislation in the last few years to address that issue. I know in Prop 8 in California, and I know we had some stuff in Florida in, I think, 2010, where there was some really confusing language on the ballot, and people might have not really been sure if they were voting for it or against it, even though, and I think a lot of that has to do with, being educated, making sure you understand the issues, but also, sometimes these the people who approve the ballot language have political, they have a political bias.
Sure. And
the ballot language may not be as clear as it needs to be for people to be able to vote unless they have a law degree.
Yeah.
Well, that's got to stop. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
We're speaking with Madison Paige, co-founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance. What do you think about the Electoral College? Time to get rid of it, or perhaps divide the electoral votes by congressional district?
Well, I've heard really good arguments on both sides. I mean, I think there's some great people who probably are a whole lot smarter than me who have solid arguments on either side. My own feeling is that we have some much deeper issues with respect to American elections, I think, than dealing with whether the Electoral College should be reapportioned or whatever. I mean, I know that there are states who are making changes already about how they plan to apportion their electoral votes. But we have a huge problem with money in politics. We have a huge problem with a lack of engagement. I think we very seldom even get 70% of eligible voters to the polls in a big national election. I think those problems are much more dangerous than how we apportion the votes. I would like to see 90% of people voting before we actually start talking about awarding electoral votes or getting rid of electoral votes or just going with a pure popular vote. I would really love to see money out of politics altogether before we start. I would like to make sure that people have access to accurate information. I would like to see some laws created about political ads and the types of information that can be conveyed before we start talking about getting rid of an electoral system. I think we have some very, very serious core issues in terms of our electoral system and engagement, citizen access, all of those types of things. Before we start worrying about that, we need to make sure everybody has access. We need to make sure everybody has good information. We need to make sure that money is not presenting an undue influence. There's a whole host of things that I think are so much more important right now than whether or not the Electoral College remains intact.
And a lot of those issues are going to keep you very busy at Bold Blue Media Alliance, too, because that's not going to be easy. Before we let you go, let's talk about social media and the role that it's playing in micropolitics that you practice. Is it the big key?
Well, it is a huge, huge benefit. I mean, how else can you let thousands of people know at a time about something that's happening in a local community that might be a good idea in their own community, or something that they can look out for that's happening that's negative in another place that they maybe need to keep an eye open for in their own community. Social media is huge. Our magazine, boldbluemagazine.com, we post stories every single day about stuff that's going on, and people share them. People share those stories in their networks. People share them with their colleagues, and they use them to make sure that they are educated about what's happening so that they can use that as part of the process of engagement at their and within their communities and within their states. So Twitter, Facebook, the website, the magazine, those are key tools that we have to be able to engage people, get people educated so that they can then go out and share that information with the electorate and make sure that they're trying to do whatever they can to get people more engaged in the process.
Okay. Madison Paige, Micropolitics activist, co-founder of Bold Blue Media Alliance, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Madison, thank you so much for your time with us. We very much enjoyed it. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're quite welcome. Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Former Ambassador Michael Ussery warns that there won't be a new Cold War between the West and the Russians, but things could get nasty and dangerous. And we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
On a recent morning, after checking news reports, I thought, what a freaky news day. Freaky story number 1 was about the governor of Texas, who rarely has any ideas, but apparently one had unexpectedly erupted from the usually dormant cluster of low-voltage brain cells in the head of Rick Perry. The headline on the story says the Gov had declared to the entire nation, "Bring us nuclear waste." Bizarre. While any quasi-sane governor would be trying to protect the state, its people, and future generations from the highly radioactive detritus of the nuclear power industry, here was Governor Goober waving in the waste. This is the same governor who adamantly rejected federal dollars to provide health coverage for millions of uninsured Texans. It seems that his health care plan is for each poor family to put a cask of nuclear waste in their closet. Freaky story number 2 was about the formation of a partnership for a new American economy. Great! At last we'll get moving on conversion to the green economy, infrastructure expansion, and reinvestment in middle-class jobs. Oh, come on. Stop making sense. This new economy bunch turns out to be hyping more of the old low-wage economy. It's made up of fast food chains, agribusiness outfits, and other operators that want Congress to create a steady stream of cheap immigrant laborers to exploit. Finally, freaky story number 3 was about the plan of congressional Republicans to help the rising number of poor people by effectively eliminating the federal food stamp program. How does that help, you might wonder? The lead pusher of the plan explains that it, quote, empowers recipients to get off the aid rolls. This is Jim Hightower saying all this freakiness was in the news on April Fool's Day, but none of it was a joke. Now that's really freaky.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Former Ambassador Michael Ussery says the United States has a strong interest in what happens in Russia, and that relations could get nasty and dangerous. And we say hello to Mike Ussery, who was ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. He's a veteran of 7 political campaigns, including the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign and the 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. Also a successful business career. He's a founder of 8 companies and 3 nonprofit organizations, and yet has taken the time to sit with us today. Mike Ussery, welcome back to americasdemocrats.org.
Jim, it's always great to be back with you. Thanks.
And we appreciate you joining us. This year is the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I. What have diplomats learned in the last century, if anything?
Well, I like the if anything. No, World War I certainly taught the world the horror of war and the advent of new weapons, and what many thought would be a quick war became a real slog. And then with the Versailles Treaty, we changed diplomatic history in a lot of ways, and I think it started a new era of diplomacy. We divided up most of the world, and we divided tribes, we divided clans, ethnicities, and from those, we're still seeing some of those problems play out today, almost 100 years later. Over the course of the last century, diplomats learned that World War I did not prevent future wars. In fact, it sowed the seeds of future conflicts, including World War II just 20 years later, Civil War in Spain before that. I think, though, we're now certainly in the new century, we're in a different era, and some new ingredients have come into diplomacy. Diplomats now have to be good at understanding economic consequences in a global economy. All kinds of new impacts from new technologies are out there now, and now we're seeing both a mix of the rights of individuals, greater than it ever was before, playing in the streets of different countries in Ukraine and the Mideast, and at the same time a resurgence of nationalism. And these are things that I think are actually overwhelming diplomacy on a global scene. And but it's just, your question is perfect. So much of this goes back to World War I and the lessons we learned from World War I and the things that we still haven't been able to master.
Yeah. Well, and just when America was turning toward the Pacific, Russia rears its head as a major nuisance. Are we going to be focusing back on Cold War issues again?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you can draw analogies and make it say it feels like it could be a Cold War coming on, but no, I think when I really think back on the Cold War, nuclear age and a real competition globally for countries and resources, I don't think that's what we're going to see, but nevertheless, I think what we are going to be facing is the seriousness of Russian nationalism, people in streets demanding their rights all around the world, and I think it's something new and different, but that isn't to diminish how serious it is, and what we're going to be having to deal with for a long time, and multidimensional. So back to your question about diplomats, I think in some ways diplomats have more of a backseat than they did in the old days, and now they've got more challenges breaking out in more places at one time. In some ways, that makes the Cold War look simpler, more of two great powers going at each other. So it whatever it is, it doesn't feel good, and I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, that's not real comforting, but it is what it is, right?
That's right. Not a Cold War, but something nasty and dangerous.
Yeah. What national interest does the U.S. have in blocking Russian territorial or economic aggression? I mean, isn't this primarily a European problem?
Well, no, it's not. It's not a European problem. It's a global problem, and its implications for other countries and what going after other territories. And the world's never had a way to go about changing the map other than by conquest. And so nobody's figured out rules of engagement or rules of break off of how whether you have elections or negotiations or whatever. So, but no, I think that this is very much a U.S. problem. you can talk about immediate European interest too, but no, I think it gets into how we are viewed around the world. I'm still a firm believer in U.S. not only as a superpower, but as the main force for global good in the world, and we don't want that to be diminished or undermined in any way, particularly just by perceptions. In terms of territorial integrity of other nations, I think we all have an interest in that, and somebody can say that if a territory is taken over, 60% of the people or 70% are happy with the result. Well, we're still a nation about human rights and the rights of everybody, and what will happen with the others who don't go along. So, no, I think it's a broad, it's an imperative U.S. interest, though dealing with the situation in the Crimea or Ukraine itself overall is definitely something that's going to require a lot of U.S. EU coordination and cooperation.
We're speaking with Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. And speaking of Europe, is the dust settling yet on the financial crisis? Has austerity succeeded or failed?
Well, dust is settled, but it's still over. It's still coating Europe. Let's say to follow that metaphor. Sure. I read a report in the media this week where it said that youth unemployment, which is probably over 20% in Bulgaria, let's say officially over 15%, and they talked about over the next years the economy's picking up, and the number of employed youth in Bulgaria will go up by 5% over the next 5 years. Well, that's a terrible statistic. That's not impressive. I'm afraid we've sort of lowered the bar around the world, and looking at sluggish growth or almost no growth is a good sign. No, I think economic pain, particularly individual economic pain and small business economic pain in Europe, is going to be a real factor, and I think it's a factor in politics. I think we're seeing that breakthrough in the French elections, and I think it's going to keep being more and more of a factor on growth overall, but also on the politics of each of these countries, at least for the next decade. So, Europe's done a good job, I guess, also of printing money, but we're all seeing the limits of printing money.
Now, I'm going to jump around as we often do with you when we have you on, Mike, but as a former appointee of Republican presidents, do you agree with some of the criticism of President Obama coming from the right, that he is weak, feckless, naive?
Well, let me start by taking the word feckless off the table. To me, that just sounds like a gratuitous insult. But I know for your listeners, let's talk about a greater reality. Yes, I do think he's been naive, and that's something we could talk about at length and in detail. Let's just say that his vision of how the world should work, God bless him, isn't the way the world works. In terms of being weak, it's really not important whether I think he's been, quote, weak in foreign policy or certainly. I think more in terms of him at times being indecisive and publicly trying to grapple with policies, when sometimes I think it'd be better to stay back behind closed doors, talk less, think out loud less. But the key on the word weak is not what Mike Ussery or somebody else in the Republican circles think. It's what countries around the world think. And if they feel that he's being weak or indecisive, I think it takes a real toll. I think it does hurt, and I think including the first of problems around the world is confusion among our own allies and friends, and that starts having a ripple effect, and if it goes on for a long time, it can be serious. Now, I will just add this one comment. I think for two reasons: one domestic, one foreign policy. With the foreign policy challenges growing, I think we're going to see the president more and more engaged over the last few years of his presidency, combined with the fact that domestically there may be less and less of of an agenda that can be accomplished. And I think by further engagement, I think we're going to see the president, make some shifts. I'm predicting this, make some turns, and get better at this foreign policy game. The other day, he articulated how tough it is for the American military after over a decade of war, the fatigue, the toll on families. But again, we live in a world where we can't just judge our military posture solely on that basis. Sometimes things land on our doorstep we wish never happened. But I will say this, if you're going to step back, if you're going to particularly pull back and pull some of the military options off of the table, the solution is not isolation. The solution is that means then you still got to probably keep your military budget at higher levels with new weapon systems, and you've got to do more by proxy. Help build up the militaries and the stability in other countries. You've got to become more engaged as a offset a bit for us being less engaged.
What are your thoughts, as a former ambassador, of the events in Benghazi? Was Christopher Stevens too rash in trying to bring his personal diplomacy to bear in such a dangerous place?
Well, I mean, Jim, thanks for your question. I wish that over a year and a half after Benghazi that, everything was known, clear, everybody had a consensus, and we don't. We still, it still stays under investigation. But, first of all, you mentioned Ambassador Stevens, who I didn't know. We had mutual friends, and they just talk about him as being a frontline diplomat. He'd been in Libya during the Civil War. He was out there. He was in the trenches. He was that kind of an activist. He was the last type of an ambassador, who would ever just stay behind the wall. So when we talk about Benghazi, I don't think much about the ambassador's decisions or his movements. My view is still, and it will never change, it's the State Department and the U.S. government's job to keep all of our diplomats safe in all kinds of circumstances, both in terms of preventative, in terms of intelligence, in terms of the personal security out there. So, if there, for whatever failures there were failures, then to me they fall on the State Department, right on their heads. And so we hope there are a lot of lessons learned from Benghazi, so nothing like this can ever happen again. And I was just involved in a U.S. government training exercise as an advisor, where part of the exercise was dealing with issues about how to evacuate embassies. So, I hope we're taking steps forward, but really, State Department should never have allowed that to happen on September 11th.
Well, I guess this is an appropriate segue into my last question for you. Drawing on your experience in the Foreign Service, what are your thoughts about Hillary Clinton's tenure at State and John Kerry's thus far?
Well, I'll start with Secretary Clinton. I've always said she really did a good job. She was a good Secretary of State, a very good Secretary of State, and really the only the criticism, which will come back, and it'll be, I think, pretty loud if she runs, was the feeling that while she was doing opening some great new doors and working on some issues, women's issues, some more development issues, that she wasn't she wasn't ready and willing to jump into the hottest, toughest issues right in the middle. But I'm like Secretary Gates. I give her high marks for what she did as Secretary. I think, unfortunately, yes, Benghazi was on her watch, and, so that's another matter. With Secretary Kerry, I was applauding the Secretary then coming in and saying, I'm going to tackle all the issues. I'm jumping in everywhere, including the Mideast peace process. I'm going to get out front on Syria. I'm going to get out front on Iran. I think the unfortunate consequence, though, has been that the secretary is starting to appear to me, and I think many others, as someone who's more focused on process instead of results, or he's not a tough negotiator. He's not the bottom line negotiator of U.S. interests that we hope. No, he went into a Mideast peace process, and when people say, what are you doing? Why did you do it this way? Look what's happening. It's going to fall apart. You know, he said on previous occasions, he said, well, what was the alternate? Well, unfortunately, here the alternate is other status quo actions, other steps. Again, laudatory that he thought he could, reignite a peace process. But, when you set that up, if you fall, if it fails, you can end up with a worse situation than what you went in with. You can end up with more violence. You can end up with more action by the parties that have to be, dealt with or contained. So, I am concerned with some of the Secretary's remarks over the Crimea and Iran and Syria, that he needs to be quite careful not to become a parody of himself. Is looking like he's somebody who's a distinguished gentleman out of a gentleman's club, but not ready for the real knife fights of the 21st century, and on the diplomatic front and in quite a few countries.
Okay. Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Bush and Reagan. Of course, a successful business career as founder of 8 companies, 3 nonprofit organizations. Mr. Ambassador, as always, we appreciate your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Senator Bernie Sanders and Congressman Mark Pocan.
Good to welcome back one of our favorites, one of our leading progressives in the United States House of Representatives, Congressman Mark Pocan from the 2nd District of Wisconsin, which includes the great city of Madison. 92.1 the mic. Happy to boom out to Madison on my 92.1. Congressman, good to see you.
Great to see you, Bill.
I'm surprised that you're up this early this morning after you guys wrestling with the Ryan budget yesterday. You're a member of the House Budget Committee. Congressman Chris Van Hollen, the ranking Democrat, was in studio yesterday morning, and he was saying that there's that as bad as the Ryan budget was, there were a whole lot of Democratic amendments or amendments you guys had put together that you're going to offer to try to make it a little better. How did that go?
Not so well. We spent about 10 and a half hours trying to make it it's hard to say a better document because fundamentally it's flawed in many ways, but to try to make it a document that might have a little less pain, and of course nothing was accepted. I don't think we got a Republican vote in the entire 10 and a half hours.
Not for even one amendment?
No.
And one of the amendments I know the Congressman talked about was immigration reform, right?
Absolutely.
You want to save money, you want to... Go ahead.
And not only is it the right thing to do, but economically it's a great boon for the country, proven by nonpartisan reports. So we had that out there to help create jobs. One of the big things is the Paul Ryan budget's been estimated to kill 3 million jobs. Now the Progressive Caucus has a better off budget. That's going to create about 8.8 million jobs, but this is going to lose 3 million jobs. And when you go through all the provisions, it doubles down on the sequester. It doesn't extend unemployment insurance. It doesn't pass immigration reform. It doesn't do any of the things that we could do to actually create jobs, and still kills them. And all at the same time, it lowers the top rate to 25% so that the rich still get richer. At one point, Paul Ryan described it as a win-win budget. Yes, I agree. It's a win for the 1% and it's a win for the second percentile. But the rest of us kind of get shafted.
Right. And so the immigration reform was shot down as well. What are the key points of the Ryan budget? We've heard it does repeal Obamacare.
It repeals all the benefits of the Affordable Care Act, but it keeps the revenue in savings. It's a completely intellectually dishonest document. So they say it balances. That's their big talking point, is it balances in 10 years, but it only balances on the worst math that a fourth grader wouldn't get by with in class, but somehow in Congress it's called intellectual might.
But if you get rid of the benefits, then you don't get the revenue.
Well, exactly.
Right?
That's why it's an intellectually dishonest document, but it still uses the dollars just to make it balance, to say we balanced it in 10 years. And they do this over year after year, and at some point I'm waiting for even people within their party, besides people like Sarah Palin who didn't like the budget, but real people within their party to say, look, this isn't intellectually honest to keep putting this forward. Or it has a $125 billion cut to food stamps. Now, you remember we had a fight during the food stamp bill of $20 billion, then it went up to $39 billion. We wound up at $8 billion. This is $125 billion. It's not even in the realm of a possibility, and yet that's the numbers they use to make this thing balance.
But there wouldn't be anything left in the program if you got $125 billion.
Oh, exactly, exactly. And Paul Ryan already, kind of separately is talking about his poverty initiatives that's got him in a lot of hot water because he sees getting rid of poverty programs as getting rid of poverty, which, of course, again, intellectually completely falls apart.
And privatize Medicare. In the Ryan budget?
Voucher system, absolutely. They'll try to argue why it's not a voucher system, but it's very clearly that. Again, they take where we take savings and put it into healthcare. They just take savings to reduce the deficit, and then you have less healthcare for everybody.
And is this? I mean, is this really what the Republicans want to run on this year? I mean, is this their platform?
This is, I think, in their heart of hearts, what they believe.
Or they just hope nobody will notice what's in it.
I think you're exactly right, Bill, because what we said is this is the crystal ball if they ever took the Senate. And if they ever took the presidency, this is what they would actually do. This would be devastating to the middle class and those aspiring to be in the middle class, devastating to students, to small business owners, go down the list, senior citizens. This is their roadmap. So we should look at this far more closely, even though we know the document's not going to be real because of the Senate and the president, and it's not real because the numbers don't mathematically work out. But this is what they really believe in and what they really want to accomplish, and that's a pretty scary document.
Yeah, boy. I'll say also that Peter, you made this point earlier. I didn't hear a lot of Republicans stand up yesterday and say, "What a great budget we've got!" Right? Take a look at this budget, folks. You're going to love it.
Yeah.
They kind of slipped it out there and then
walked away from it.
Here
it is, bye.
Well, they didn't even have a press conference. They kind of said, "Oh, what's that on the floor? Oh, that's the budget." Okay, that's how they introduced it. And
that's what that smell is.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, if you're doing that, you don't have a lot to go on, and yet, I'm kind of surprised they still brought it out there. I just think that they really believe this stuff. That's the problem. And as much as they may not want to tout it during an election year, this is what happens if they take the Senate. This is what will happen. If they continue to hold the House, this is what will happen. That's why we got to pick up the seats in the House and hold the Senate.
Now, we mentioned that the Ryan budget would repeal Obamacare. He released this the same day. I was down at the White House in the Rose Garden when the president announced that 7.1 million people had signed up by the deadline of March 31. And, of course, there are a couple of 100,000 that are still in line that are doing their paperwork now. So the number is going to be even higher. What does that mean to you about the future of Obamacare?
To me, that's a tremendous success, right? Everything they said they were going to accomplish with it, they did, and then some. The problem is the Republicans are still going to point to some guy in Oklahoma whose rates went up, right? And that's going to be everything they talk about is some guy. It's always anecdotal. But 7.1 is a vice president say a pretty big
BFD.
Yeah, BFD. Thank you. It is radio. I got to be careful. It's a great success, and that's just signing into that. How about the state exchanges? How about the children who are staying on their parents' policies? Go down the list of all the other benefits, and suddenly
expanded Medicaid.
People really have, except of course in states like Wisconsin, where Scott Walker refuses to do what's right for his own constituents because he's too busy running for president. But we've got some real big successes.
Do you think this will embolden Democrats now to stand up and say, Yeah, I voted for it, and I'm proud I voted for it.
You know, I think we should. Those of us who don't, I think, are miscalculating the success that's out there. I've never had people call my office crying in before like they did when they called. I had several of these, again, not to govern by anecdote, but called up and said, I've never been able to get health care access before. I got stopped in the grocery store by someone who runs a daycare saying, I finally can now, I have health care. I'd never been able to have it before. All these years she's been taking care of, my neighbor's children. This is something that really significantly changes people's lives in a very positive way, and I think we should be very, very proud of that.
Yeah, because I would hope that Democrats that this is an opportunity to flip the debate, and instead of being on the defensive about explaining why they still support it even though it has some flaws, is turning around to Republicans and say, no, you explain why you want to take away all these good things that so many millions of Americans are enjoying right now.
Exactly. And they have no alternative. And let's put it this way. If you want health care access, you like Democrats. If you want a better done website, get a Republican. Right?
That's a good way of putting it. The minimum wage, Congressman, you've been leading the charge, one of those leading the charge in the House to raise the minimum wage. The president talked about it yesterday at the University of Michigan. There's no doubt the American people are for it. I think the majority of Republicans are probably for it, except Republicans in your body of Congress.
Right. I'm a small business owner. I've been, since I had hair, 26 years, over half of my lifetime. And there are a lot of reasons why it's good to raise the minimum wage. First of all, we're way past where we should be. Right now we would be at like $10.68 an hour if we kept up with inflation from 1968, something right around that figure. But two, this puts money immediately into the economy. Immediately, you have people who are able to buy things, and that stimulates the economy. So as a small business owner, I know that it has that rising tide effect and helps everyone out. And, to think that someone's going to get by on $15,000 is just not true. The real thing, and I had slides yesterday I brought up during the committee, is people think it's always a high school kid living at home with a little extra money. That's 12% of the people are under 20. Not even high school kids, but under 20. The rest are, the average age is 35. These are people who are head of households. Half of them, it's over half of their income. This is real money to real people, and it's time we give America a raise.
I was stunned by that yesterday. I didn't know that until the president said it yesterday, the average age 35.
Yeah.
Because people, you always hear this, these are teenagers with their first jobs. But
Exactly.
Well, I hope you can beat some sense into your Tea Party Republicans in the House and get some action on that, Congressman. Justice Stephen Breyer said if Citizens United open the doors, the McCutcheon ruling yesterday opens the floodgates for more money in politics. One of the first voices to speak out strongly to condemn that decision, Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont, who joins us on our news line this morning and joins me in studio with Congressman Mark Pocan from Madison, Wisconsin. Senator Sanders, good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
By the way, I have to know, during the break, I learned that Mark Pocan lives in Vermont, Wisconsin, Senator. So I guess...
Two great Vermont politicians.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Vermont is taking over.
Yes.
What do you see, Senator, wrong about this Supreme Court decision yesterday?
Well, it's all wrong, Bill. We live in a country today where we have more wealth and income inequality than any time in the modern history of America. And what's happening is the people who have the money are now using their billions to help elect right-wing candidates all over this country, who will make the rich even richer. And Citizens United has allowed folks like the Koch brothers, who are worth $80 billion, to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars electing candidates who will pursue their right-wing agenda. We recently saw the spectacle last week of Sheldon Adelson welcoming Republican potential presidential candidates to Las Vegas and essentially saying, look, if you tell me what I want to hear, if you do what I want you to do, guess what? I'm going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars for your presidential campaign. And what the decision yesterday did, it simply accelerated that process, and it said that instead of being able to spend something like $125,000 on direct contributions to candidates, you can now spend $3 or $4 or $5 million. You can now provide $5,000 to hundreds and hundreds of candidates. So what the essence of the decision is about is to give the top 1%, the millionaires and billionaires, even more power over the political process. Now, interestingly enough, Bill, Judge Thomas, who is maybe the most right-wing of a right-wing Supreme Court, he said, and this is where the Republican Party wants to go, and people should know, Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party have been pushing these decisions. What Judge Thomas said is, you know what, yeah, this is okay, but I want to go even further. I want to eliminate all restrictions, all limitations on campaign spending. In other words, where Thomas wants to go and where the Republican Party wants to go is to a moment where the Koch brothers can provide unlimited sums of money directly to every single right-wing candidate in America. And when you do that, you really are, in a very fundamental way, destroying American democracy, and it's something we've got to fight back vigorously against.
And that's clearly where John Roberts, I think, wants to go, too. I mean, this seems to be his agenda, right? Citizens United, now McCutcheon.
Keep it going, absolutely. And then we can, you stop and you think, over the last 100 years, what we've tried to do with American democracy, we've tried to expand American democracy. We, 1924, women got the right to vote. During the 60s, African Americans in the South got the right to vote. During the Vietnam War, we lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. This is an exact reversal of all of that.
Yeah.
Got rid of the poll tax during the 60s. What this says, okay, what America is going to be about is a society in which a handful of billionaires will be able to elect the candidates that they want. And if you don't have a whole lot of money, forget getting involved in politics, because you ain't going to win. And again, I think people should be aware this is not just some kind of esoteric concern about campaign finance. What this means, what these guys want to do, they want to destroy Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the Environmental Protection Agency. They want to give even more tax breaks to billionaires. They want to eliminate the concept of the minimum wage. This is a right-wing agenda, and what the Supreme Court did yesterday is just continue the process of giving more and more power to the very wealthy.
And hard to make the argument, I think impossible to make the argument that this is in any way good for democracy. Congressman, another issue, Senator Sanders, another issue that you and the Congressman have been working on. We were talking with the Congressman in the last segment about the minimum wage, which, of course, you've been working on in the Senate.
Right.
And it looks like, Senator, will there be some action this week on extending unemployment insurance?
I think finally, after months and months and months, and folks like Jack Reed of Rhode Island deserve a lot of credit for this, after months of fighting us, it appears that we now have 5 Republicans, at least 5 Republicans, who will give us the 60 votes that we need to overcome a Republican filibuster to pass this thing. And this will impact several million American workers who are at the end of their ropes financially. These are people who are long-term unemployed. Long-term unemployment today is probably as high as it has been in a very, very long period of time. It is the moral and right thing to do, and it's also good economics, because when you put money into these people's hands, they're going to go out and spend that money and create more jobs. So to answer your question, Bill, we are crossing our fingers here, but we think we have a few Republican votes finally that will enable us to pass it. And then, of course, the bill goes to our friends over there in the House, and we'll see what happens there.
Well, Congressman, with a bipartisan vote that Senator Sanders was talking about coming to the House, do you think that at least there's a chance?
It's the best pressure we could possibly have. I think the votes would be there if we could bring it to the floor. I think it's up to Speaker Boehner to decide if he's the Speaker of the House of Representatives or he's the Speaker for the Tea Party, and that's the problem we've had so often this last year.
Senator, I want to give you one last word here. There is a rumor, in fact, I picked up my Nation magazine this week, and on the cover of the Nation magazine, your picture and the thought that you might consider running for president in 2016.
Well, if the Nation says it, there must be some element of truth in it. But this is what I've said, Bill. I honestly and truly do not wake up every morning, look into the mirror and say, hey, this is the next president of the United States. Far from it. I think anybody who wants to run for president has got to be a little bit crazy. But this is what I do believe. I believe that this country faces more serious problems today than any time since the Great Depression. And if you throw in climate change, maybe the problems are even worse. And I think, at the very least, we need a vigorous discussion about why the middle class is disappearing, why the gap between the very rich and everybody else is growing wider, and what we can do to rebuild the middle class, to create the millions of jobs that this country desperately needs, to ask the question why America is the only major country on earth without a national health care program guaranteeing health care to all people, to ask the question about what actions do we have to take now, today, to reverse climate change. So I am prepared to jump into that race and raise those issues if other people are not going to do that.
When you make that decision, you'll be the first to let us know. Senator Sanders, thank you so much for your great work for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Congressman Mark Pocan, for coming in as well.
Absolutely.
Heard that? Take that message back to the Progressive Caucus.
Yes, we've got a lot of great folks in our Progressive Caucus in the House working on this stuff every day, and Keith Ellison or Olga Halva have done a great job leading us.
Absolutely. Glad that you're there.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Madison Paige, Michael Ussery, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.